Personally, no, I don't think they're too genetically modified. There have been a few fish in my experience that I've looked at that I felt like, wow, that fish is pretty miserable. But that's like the very, very extreme end of the spectrum. In general, no, I don't think that pearl scales and bubble eyes are too genetically modified. I actually do have some concerns or questions, I guess, about the ethics of breeding fish that have so many health problems. And I wouldn't have said this before, but after the experiences that I've had with them, getting sick so easily, is it right? I don't know. I'm not gonna open that can of worms like I guess I just did, but I guess I'm just gonna crack the lid a little bit on that can of worms, but I'm not gonna spill it completely. Hey guys, it's Jenny and welcome back to my channel. I hope you enjoyed the super dramatic intro that I had fun with. But seriously, this is quite a big topic and I've put off making this video for a little while now for a couple of reasons. The first reason is I still do like goldfish, and also I don't really want to alienate those of you out there who also like goldfish. Having spent more than 10 years deeply immersed in the goldfish hobby and also being the largest goldfish YouTube channel, trust me, I know how lovable goldfish are and why someone would like them. I have really conflicted feelings about this video. It makes me sad to be posting it, but I think it is important. The second reason is kind of tied in with that. I still am figuring out my own feelings in regards to whether breeding goldfish is ethical or not. I was putting off making this video until I really had my thoughts together and I really knew what I thought. But you know what? I think my opinion on this is just always going to be really nuanced, and I think it's important to start a conversation about this. So I decided to make the video anyways. So let's get into what I think about the ethics of goldfish breeding. And my main issues really can be boiled down to two distinct categories. The first one being the physiology of the fish, and the second one being inhumane practices on goldfish farms or from goldfish breeders. First, we're going to tackle the physiology of the fish, which is a huge topic, but I will try to be as succinct as possible. Now, there are a lot of health issues that goldfish have just inherently, and we'll get into the reasons why they have those issues, but they absolutely do impact their health and their longevity. In many ways, goldfish can be compared to dog breeds. We have selectively bred dogs over hundreds of years, to the point where we now have several different distinct breeds of dogs that all look very different from one another. And actually the dog breeds of today look very different than they did when those breeds were first established. So I have a German Shepherd, so let's talk about that breed in specific. If you look at the conformation standards of the German Shepherd from 100 years ago, you will see a dog that is drastically different from the German Shepherd that we know today. Over the past 100 years, German Shepherds have been bred to be on average about 30 pounds larger, to have a much wider and deeper chest, which puts them at great risk of bloat. And they've also been bred to have that characteristic back and back leg slope, which puts them at huge risk of hip and elbow dysplasia, which is a very painful and quite crippling condition. So we can see that whether it's dog breeds or goldfish varieties, once we humans get our hands on them, start playing around with the genetics and selectively breeding, we have a tendency to pick out the most noticeable characteristics of an animal and just breed it over time to be more and more extreme, often to the detriment of the animal itself. So let's look at the physiology of the ancestor to the goldfish, which is the Crucian carp. People started noticing that there were some natural mutations popping up within the Crucian carp, where some of them would have brighter colors, almost appearing reddish. So they took those more reddish ones and bred them together to produce even more brightly red colored offspring. But it didn't stop there. Oh no. Something about the carp made it more prone to these natural mutations, and people started noticing certain things about the fish that they decided to selectively breed to be more and more extreme. For example, how the bubble eye variety started was people noticed these very, very tiny little fluid-filled sacs under the eyes of some of the fish, and they took that and ran with it. They just bred ones that had that together, then they selected the babies that had bigger bubbles under their eyes, bred those together, and so on and so on and so on, until we have the modern day bubble eye, which looks nothing like a crush and carp, and it's got these gigantic fluid-filled sacs underneath both of its eyes. So this selective breeding has been going on with goldfish for many, many years now, to the point where, just like with dog breeds, we have a lot of different distinct goldfish varieties. Some of them are very, very strange, like the very alien-looking bubble eye, which I actually happen to think is cute because I'm a weirdo like that, to the pearl scale goldfish, which is a super bloated-looking, round-bodied fish that has calcified deposits on each scale, which I also happen to think is cute, but again, weirdo alert. So now the biggest change that we humans made to the crush carp when it became the goldfish was in the body shape. Now the crush carp has a streamlined, typical fish body, and that's because this is the most efficient way for a fish to get around underwater. And as such, their internal organs are all organized within that frame to fit well within the streamlined body shape. But when we started selectively breeding goldfish to have that shortened, more round, wider body shape, what we did to them is effectively squish all of their internal organs into a really small space that they don't really fit very well in. So as you can see, what we've done with fancy goldfish is very similar, if not identical, to what we've done with dog breeds. However, I would argue that with fish, it's a lot worse because a lot less care is taken to avoid extreme inbreeding than it is with dogs. But hey, they're just fish, right? So with the compacted body shape that goldfish now have, thanks to us, they have a hard time getting around because they tend to develop swim bladder issues. If you've spent any amount of time in the goldfish hobby, you've definitely heard of swim bladder issues, if not experienced it multiple times yourself with your own fish. So what is the swim bladder anyways? The swim bladder is an organ that most bony fish have, and it helps them maintain their buoyancy in the water. It's filled with gas that the fish can adjust to control its depth in the water without floating upwards or sinking downwards. One thing I used to do a lot is whenever I would have a fish that passed away, I would, especially if I suspected any sort of issue, I would do a necropsy on that goldfish. And what I saw every single time with the swim bladder was deformities. Now the swim bladder is supposed to have the frontal or cranial lobe plus the caudal or back lobe. So it's a two-lobed sac of air basically inside of the animal, and you can see it pretty easily when you do a necropsy. I could see one lobe, but the caudal lobe was so small and shriveled that I almost didn't even know it was there. Granted, this is just my personal experience, so it's not scientific evidence by any means, but I have had a lot of fish over the past 10 years, and just think of it this way: how many of you have goldfish or have had goldfish, and how many of you have experienced swim bladder issues? Swim bladder issues are just all over the place. It's one of the major issues that goldfish have, whether they are sinking uncontrollably or floating uncontrollably. I've experienced both of them. They both are equally bad for the fish and hard on you as the owner because you feel like you've done something wrong, but really it's just the way that the fish is. It can't function properly because its body is so squished and all of its internal organs are compacted inside of that small, tiny, round little frame. When the fish are floating, they get sores from their skin being exposed to the air. When the fish sink, they get sores from sitting on the bottom. I have done a few different videos now just trying to show you guys how to fix sores on fish from either bottom sitting or surface floating. So it's a very, very prominent issue. And there's no cure for swim bladder disorders either. It's a structural problem with the internal organ of the fish, so you really can't fix it. Swim bladder disorders are far from the only health issue that goldfish have to deal with though. I will just briefly name a few. So for one thing, bubble eye goldfish, while I think they're cute, a lot of people probably think they're cute, they do have an extremely severe risk of getting their bubbles popped on decorations, on the filter intake, on you name it. They can find a way to hurt themselves because they're clumsy. They can't swim very well. And the bubbles are also very fragile. So they pop, and then chances are that popped bubble is going to get infected. The fish is going to die, or it'll grow back small, and then the fish will be all lopsided. Also, in my opinion, and based on my past experiences, I really strongly feel that goldfish have a decreased immune response compared to your average aquarium fish in the hobby, and it's because of all the inbreeding. The mutations that occurred in such a small amount of fish that the gene pool just isn't very big, so their immune response is not good, and they get sick very easily from things that your average aquarium fish would not even notice whatsoever. And this is one of the reasons why most serious goldfish keepers will have barely any substrate at all, if any. A lot of times actually they'll have a bare bottom tank, and that's because if you have, especially if you have a deep layer of substrate like gravel or something, it can just become really anaerobic and become a very good breeding ground for bad bacteria, and then the fish get sick just because there's bacteria in the gravel that their immune systems can't fight off. And it's one of the big reasons why I always had, whenever I could, I had a UV sterilizer on my tank. It wasn't just to keep the water clear, it was to try and do whatever I could to keep the fish healthy. As we already mentioned with the bubble eyes, goldfish are just really prone to getting injured, so it's not a good idea to have any decorations in with them. Every decoration you want to put in the tank, you have to really consider for a long time and think, okay, are my fish gonna be able to find a way to get hurt on this? Because they will. It's just inevitable. They're really bad at swimming. They're really clumsy because they don't have that streamlined fish body shape that they should. All of the things that I mentioned so far mean that the average fancy goldfish has a much, much shorter lifespan than their ancestor, the Crush and Carp would, or even a shorter lifespan than, say, like a comet goldfish or shabunkin or even a Joaquin would have. Those fish still have the streamlined body shape, so they're gonna remain a lot healthier. Also, they're a little bit less fancy, we say. They don't have the egg body shape. They don't have such huge double tails. They don't have protruding eyes or bubbles or things like that. So they're a little bit less inbred. Their genetics have been a little bit less messed with. So even those will have a much longer lifespan than your average fancy egg-bodied goldfish. And I just don't know, I don't really think it's super ethical to be breeding animals that are going to have a poor quality of life and a shortened lifespan just because of the way that you've bred them to be and just because you think they're cute. Yes, I think goldfish are cute. I love them. I will always love them. But is it worth it? So now that we've talked about the physiology of the fish, I want to talk about my other bone to pick that I have with goldfish breeding, which is inhumane practices on goldfish farms and from goldfish breeders. And the things that I know about are probably just the tip of the iceberg, and they're still bad enough. So it's scary to think about all the inhumane things that are happening to these fish just to produce a few good ones that I don't even know about. Many of you might not know this because I never really spoke about it on my channel. I wanted to keep my channel separate from the work that I was doing outside of that. But the reason that I moved to Florida originally was because I was offered a job at an ornamental fish farm down there. And at first I was really excited for the opportunity because I loved fish and I was able to do social media stuff for them, which I also love. But as time went on, I started to witness a lot of just flat out fish abuse, and I spoke up about it as well. Now, I understand that when you're producing, I don't even know how many, say hundreds of thousands of fish to sell, that some of them are not going to be keepers and some of them are going to have to be culled, and you're going to have to figure out what to do with the extra fish. But what this particular farm, and I'm sure almost all other farms are doing the same thing, what they chose to do with their unprofitable fish that were extra or considered too ugly to sell is they would just dump them on the side of the road in a dry ditch and let them suffocate in the sun. And in case you didn't know, it actually takes several hours for a fish to suffocate and die that way. So they're just torturing these fish en masse and thought it was perfectly fine because fish don't feel pain, right? Yes, fish do feel pain, okay? I have a lot of experience with fish, and I can see clearly that they feel pain. Also, they're a living organism, so wouldn't it be beneficial for them to be able to feel pain so they know what things to avoid in order to avoid death? That's the whole reason we feel pain. So I never understood this argument that, oh, fish don't feel pain. It's like, use your brain cells. They feel pain. They're a living organism. It's not that hard. So that was a large farm. You might be thinking, well, maybe that's just because it was a large commercial breeding operation, but small family-run farms might be different, right? They might be sometimes, but that's unfortunately not always the case. I witnessed something horrible at a small family-run farm when I went on my goldfish trip to Japan that I haven't spoke of yet because I just didn't feel comfortable speaking about it, but it needs to be said. I had to stand and watch because it was part of the show. They needed to put this in the show. First, what they did was they sedated all of the baby geekings. Now, if you don't know, a geeking is a type of goldfish, and they're known for their color pattern, which is all white except for 12 red points. So they'll have red eyes, red gill covers, red fins. I always thought that that color pattern was produced through selective breeding. So I was shocked to find out that at least on this particular farm, I don't know how other ones do it, that was not the case. They took the baby geekings when they were about this big, so 3 inches, and sedated all of them. And then one by one, they would grab them out of the water with their little bamboo scraper and forcibly scrape off all of the skin and all of the scales of the baby fish, and then put them in a tub of antibiotic water to hopefully stave off infection after having their entire body of skin scraped off, and hope that most of them would survive the ordeal, because when they did, the scales would grow back white or clear, and then they would have that perfect geeking coloring that they wanted. I can still hear the scraping of the bamboo stick against the bone of the fish on its head especially. It just sounded like nails on a chalkboard, but worse, because you know a living being is being tortured for no reason. That wasn't fun. Another example is with Tosakans. So if you don't know, the Tosakan variety is known for having a fantail body shape and then a big, huge tail that wraps around and almost touches their head on both sides because it's so big and it kind of flips in a particular way. And it is beautiful, it really is, but the fish can't swim. The way that they get the tail to look like that is they keep the fish in a very small bowl from the time it's very young. I'm assuming they do daily water changes because they would have to keep up water quality. But the point is that you want the fish to swim as little as possible, because if the fish swims too much pressure will be put on the tail and it will fold and it will never develop into that big, beautiful, curled Tosakan tail that they're known for. I don't know if I have to explain why it's unethical to not allow a fish to swim and to keep it confined to a small, tiny little bowl for most of its life. So just to reiterate, this video is hard for me to make because I love goldfish. I have loved goldfish for over 10 years. And not only that, but I've developed a community online of people who love goldfish too. But I also know that you guys care just as much as I do about treating animals with respect. And some of the things that I've witnessed over the past 10 years and just in my personal experience, it's just this cognitive dissonance where I don't really see a lot of respect being given to goldfish as a whole by humanity as a whole. And I'm not here to tell anyone what to think. I'm not here to tell anyone what to do. What you do with this information is completely your prerogative. I will not judge anybody for having goldfish because I had goldfish for so many years and I still love them. I know how appealing they are and why they're appealing. They're adorable, they're funny, they're cute, they're beautiful, there's so many things. And I don't want to take that away from anybody. But I do just want to make you aware of some of the ethical issues around goldfish. And maybe when we start this conversation, we can find ways to still enjoy the goldfish hobby, but make sure that we are not supporting unethical and inhumane practices. It's taken me a long time, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of pain going through health issue after health issue with my beautiful goldfish, and in a very public way, no less. But finally for me, the obvious problems of breeding and inbreeding fish that look so unnatural and so far removed from the traditional fish body shape that they are supposed to have outweighed my love for them. I'm not saying that I'll never have goldfish again. As I've mentioned throughout this video, there are several types of goldfish that are still just as fun and cute to me that don't have these health issues, like the longer bodied fish specifically. And I'm also not painting all goldfish breeders with a broad brush. Personally, I know some that are really good. They do their absolute best to produce fish that are as healthy as they can be, even though they are the egg-bodied goldfish, so they're, you know, naturally going to be prone to some things. But there are breeders out there who genuinely care about the well-being of their fish, and I so appreciate them for that. But I just think more often than not, what's happening is these fish are just being treated very inhumanely. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm sure there are plenty of things that I failed to mention, so if you can think of anything as well, let's keep this conversation going in the comments. All right, thank you guys for watching. I'm sorry this video was a little bit of a downer, but I will try to come back next week with a more fun video. See you guys next time.